Disobey. My goodness, it is an honor to be here. I had no idea if this was actually going to happen. So I want to tell you the story about how this happened. As you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not quite from around here. I'm from the United States, right in the northern central part of the United States. It's just about as cold there as it is here, so I'm used to the temperature. But I was actually at Black Hat giving training with the rest of the Trusted Sec crew. This was last year in August. And one of the students that I had talked with a little bit during class, during break, we sit down for lunch, and Black Hat, it's just, huge. There's like loads and loads of tables everywhere. We sit down, I'm sitting down with a couple of my coworkers, and then this student sits down. He sits down, we start talking, and I couldn't remember his name. I was like, I'm sorry, my name's Jason. What's your name? And he said, Ben. And I was like, well, hey, Ben, well, it's, nice to meet you. How are you enjoying the class? We made small talk. And I could tell that he also wasn't from around where I was from. And I said, so Ben, whereabouts are you from? And he said, well, I'm from Finland. I said, really? I said, how's the InfoSec scene there? What's it like in Finland? How's it, information security and all that? He's like, oh, it's good. He said, I help maintain and run a conference in Finland. I said, really? I said, well, what's the conference? And he said, it's called Disobey. And I said, what's that? And he said, oh, and he was so modest. He was like, oh, it's a small security conference, going on in Helsinki. And I was like, small, like he says small, and I'm thinking like 200-300 people. And I said, well, how big is that? And he said, oh, it's about 1,700. I was like, what? Excuse me? 1,700? And I said, well, hey, I mean, if I love speaking, so if you're ever looking for a speaker, let me know. And a few months later, he let me know, and here I am. How fantastic is that? You guys have a fantastic vibe going on here. It really reminds me of, oh yeah. Give yourself an applause, especially for all the organizers, all that. You guys really have like a DerbyCon 3, like a young DerbyCon vibe going on. It's absolutely fantastic. But you guys are here for Circling Dragons. So let's talk about that. Red Team lessons from modern breaches. A little bit about myself. My name is Jason Lang. I am the practice lead of the target operations team at Trusted Sec. You may be familiar with Trusted Sec, maybe not. It was founded by Dave Kennedy about 10 years ago, based out of Ohio. I am the practice lead, so I run the red team at Trusted Sec. I get to work with some of the most talented red teamers in the world against some of the most difficult clients in the world. It is such a privilege to work with my team, with that company. I've been doing InfoSec full-time for about 15 years, both offensive and defensive roles. You can find me there on Twitter. My specialty is red teaming Ansible, that sort of thing. And you see my hobbies have absolutely nothing to do with computers or screens whatsoever. So if you want to talk woodworking or beekeeping, find me in the bar afterwards. I'm happy to talk about that. Let's talk about goals for this talk and why should you be interested in something like this? Because the title of the talk is kind of nebulous. What does that even mean? I'm a red teamer, not a blue teamer. Okay, so the first goal that I have is to actually look at modern breaches from a red teamer's perspective. And I'm taking a little bit of a different angle with this, and the reason why I'm doing that is because typically when you get a hold of like a breach report and you start reading through it, and there's TTPs and that kind of stuff, and you're like, this is interesting. And normally at the end, it's like, here's how you should secure your network from the bad guys. And that's good, right? I mean, we want that. Like, actually, let me ask you this. How many red teamers, professional red teamers in the audience? 2. Believe that for a second. All right, I'm going to assume there might be a few more, but anyways. So like, normally those reports look at it from a defensive perspective. I'm going to be evaluating some of those reports from the perspective of a red teamer. What does it look like from my perspective, and can I learn any lessons from those breach reports? Because that's fundamentally the job of a red teamer, is to emulate an adversary, simulate an adversary, or emulate and simulate, one or the other, depending on who you're debating with, okay, and see what are the techniques that are being used, and can I use that in my target environment and try and improve my client's defenses. And there may or may not be some hype associated with red teaming. I don't know. Okay, we'll find out. If there is, we'll break it down. Okay, but why? Why this talk? A couple of quotes that I thought really summarized red teaming very well. The first one, I'll give you just a second to read that. Men of sense often learn from their enemies. It is from their foes, not their friends, that cities learn the lesson of building high walls and ships of war. I thought that one was really applicable to red teaming. Why is that? It's because it's only when you are faced with an adversary that you know what you're capable of. that you know what your defenses are. Okay, now a red team is not actually the adversary. I liken us more to, say, a sparring partner. If you have someone that's like a prize fighter that's preparing for a fight, okay, and you're a sparring partner, you don't go in and try and knock them out, okay? Maybe you do. I don't know if you guys spar now, but like you don't go in and like just try and knock them out. You try different techniques, different combinations, right? But the fundamental goal of sparring is to improve your prize fighter. That's the goal, okay? That's fundamentally what the red team is supposed to do. It was General Schwarzkopf in the Desert Storm Initiative. He said, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. I like that. Okay, people like to think that they rise to their expectations. That's not true. They fall to their training. Okay, you don't rise to the expectation, your self-expectation. You fall to the level you've been trained at. And as red teamers, that's what we do. We train defenders to increase their level of training to make them better fighters, so to speak. Okay, so let's get into some of the practicals and what some of this research looked like. First, the high level. 83% of breaches, and by the way, this is from Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report 2023. 83% of breaches involved external actors. Now that's interesting. It's kind of a common statistic. I'm a little more interested in the 17% that was internal. More on that later. 74% of breaches involved the human element. Okay, and other talks have fleshed this out even more. Human element, social engineering, human errors, somebody picks up the phone, gives up information that they shouldn't give up, somebody responds to a phish, those sorts of things. That's human error. And nearly all attacks were financially motivated. And this, I thought, was a little interesting because I used to think to myself that attackers were really interested in like the notoriety. Okay, they were like bragging, they want bragging rights in their IRC room and that kind of thing. And then ransomware just took off. And then it all turned into money. It's all about money now. Okay, and maybe the whole thing with the bragging rights, maybe that still is a thing, but in my opinion now, that's really just how attackers get caught, right? They pull off, some cool hack, and they go into a room and start bragging about it. Their OPSEC goes out the window, and they give up their real IP, and bam, police knocking at the door. Okay, so I was looking at these various breach reports, and this is a new thing to me. Typically, I'm the one trying to run the breach, not necessarily investigating what others have done, so to speak, like in the cybercrime world. So this was a bit of interesting to me. And so looking into that, I had to ask myself, was there a commonality? All these various breach reports that I'm digging into, was there one thing that kind of connected it all together? One thread that ran through all these? And you see, English is a complex language, as many of you know. You're trying to learn English, and it's like you look at all these various words. Okta says this, targeted and sophisticated attacks. You start looking at all these, and I'm reading these, and I'm getting confused, and I'm going, how can I link all these together for these people? If only there was a word that tied everything together. I don't know. Well, and it's not, surely there was no hype associated with any of these breaches. No. Certainly not. Not even possible that there would be hype surrounding, some of these attacks. I had no clue. No idea. Okay, and so I started randomly just flipping through the dictionary. Just like to pull up a dictionary, start looking, trying to see if I could find the right word. I just randomly landed on this word right here, sophisticated. Okay, and I love the definition here from vocabulary.com. If something is sophisticated, it's complicated and intricate. Inner workings of a computer are sophisticated. Yes. They can also refer to having good taste. Either way, and here it is, sophisticated things are impressive. You should be impressed. That's right. If it's sophisticated, you should be impressed. And that, I think, that's really what we're trying to say, isn't it? If a company gets breached and then they release a report that talks through how the breach happened, inevitably it was sophisticated. Why is that? It's because they want you to think that the attacker was so awesome and they had no chance. This little company over here, and then we just got hacked. There's nothing we could do. Okay, they want you to be impressed. And so I did an extraordinarily scientific study about this, and I came up with this graph that puts together how much face a company is trying to save and how sophisticated the attack was, you can see a direct correlation. Very scientific study. Okay, but in narrowing down these various breach reports, I put them into 3 categories of what I will call sophisticants. 3 categories of sophisticants. Number 1 is the novice. Look at this guy. He's got a bow, he's probably got a sword, he's got some Metasploits and cobalt strikes. He's awesome. Okay, he's ready. And so I was talking with Tyler, the guy that runs incident response at TrustedSec, and I was like, hey, Tyler, I don't know much about like all this, incident, like this breach stuff. Can you point me in the right direction? He said, yes. You need to go read the D24report.com. I was like, sweet. So I pulled up the D4 report, and I started looking through the articles, and I see this one here right in the middle. SQL brute force leads to blue sky ransomware. I was like, that sounds crazy. Like as a red teamer, like SQL brute force, who the heck is doing SQL? This must be sophisticated. So I dig into it. Here's the second sentence. The activity started with brute force password attempts for the SA account on an internet-facing server. All right, let me see if I can wrap my head around that. An internet-facing server. So you got a bad guy, and you got a database server, and he's going straight to that thing on TCP 1433 right on the internet, right? And then using Metasploit to fire off gobs of brute force. No. That's not possible. That is not the way it is, okay? See, in my mind, I automatically want to make this harder than it is. Surely, the way that this attack actually worked in real life is our attacker had to connect to like some web proxy and it's like another bunch of firewalls, then like this down to this other proxy, and there's like CVs and firewalls everywhere. Bam, super sophisticated, right? I don't think so. I think it was actually just a busted firewall rule, and according to the article, it was about 10,000 different attempts. That password right there, the Inspiron password, that is the 10,000th password in rocku.txt. So put yourself in the attacker's shoes for a second. Assume that you have compromised a database server straight on the internet, okay? What is the first thing that you would do if you were in this position? Anyone have a guess? What's that? Dump the database. I like that better, but remember, this is a novice. You'd probably enable XP Command Shell. First thing, right? And that's what our attacker does. Turns on XP Command Shell, okay, and then he launches a bevy of sophisticated attacks. This is fantastic. I was blown away. First of all, our attacker kicks off Cobalt Strike. And then from Cobalt Strike, he loads up, I don't know, Power View and Power Exploit and, decides he's going to fire off Mimikatz because it's 2015 or something like that. And so he's launching all this stuff, right? And then he gets some fantastic credentials. But in the midst of this attack, he apparently starts to have, an existential crisis because he starts asking questions that you would ask about, like, the origins of the world. For example, who am I? I don't know. Who are you? Okay, so but our attacker picks up some great credentials because 15 minutes after initial access, he moves laterally towards domain controllers and file shares using remote service creation. That's breach speak for PS exec. Okay, so connects over to a domain controller 15 minutes later, and what would you do if you're the bad guy? You would, bring down some, crypto mining stuff and launch some ransomware. Total time to ransomware was 32 minutes. 32 minutes, okay. Now, you might ask yourself, is that feasible? And the answer is, well, yes, it's feasible. In fact, I tweeted something similar. Fish sent 1045, shell in a minute, and then DA about 40 minutes later. Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. In 2016, yes, before the advent of modern defenses, for example, CrowdStrike, Microsoft, those are the two EDRs that we see 95% of the time, okay? So is that stuff feasible? Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's the D4 report. You may think to yourself, well, maybe they set up a honeypot just to be able to write the report. Yeah, that's possible, but it doesn't matter because what the attacker did was real. Okay, and so what's the lesson to be taken from this? And I was trying to bring this to a point. The lesson, at least from myself as a red teamer, is don't skip the basics. All right, again, if you're a sparring partner, you're not going in hard for the knockout. Okay, what you're going to do, you're going to size up your opponent, and you're going to perform attack and defend in accordance with the skill of your opponent. If you're 5 feet taller than your opponent and you just drop like a Superman punch and knock him out, like that doesn't help anyone. Okay, so what does that mean? It means you scale the attack to the skill of the person that you're sparring with. All right, that's how I see basics, at least from my standpoint. All right, and you might think to yourself, well, I mean, nobody's doing that anymore. Well, in 2021, the Conti playbook was leaked. These are basics, in my opinion. This is the actual APT group, and these are the commands that they're running. Okay, and then I'm thinking to myself, would I ever run these on a red team? No, I don't wanna. But how many times, and this has happened dozens of times, where I get to the end of an engagement and the client is like, okay, I need you to make some noise. And I'm like, you haven't seen anything that we've done? No. Okay, Bloodhound -C all, go. and the client's like, did you do it? And I'm like, yeah, yes, it's going. Crack map exec, spray the hash, go. Okay, we saw something. And it's like, when that happens, you scale down your attack because that's fundamentally the goal, is to raise them up and to bring them up to the next level, not 10 levels, to the next level. All right, so that's the novice. Let's talk about the professional. Impressive. You will be impressed. First of all, MGM Caesars, September 2023. You might remember, there are people already laughing. You might remember the Caesars attack. Caesars Casino in Las Vegas, where DEF CON was held. The facts regarding that attack: number one, $80 million was lost in revenue due to 36 hours of downtime. Threat actor was Scattered Spider. Compromise of the loyalty program database, including personally identifiable information, the social security number and such. 6 terabytes of data walked off and was held for ransom. Attacker asked for $30 million. Okay, now that's kind of a typical ransomware scenario. At least maybe it is, maybe it isn't. At least in my opinion, that strikes me as something that I typically see. But what was interesting is that the attacker blogged about it. This is actually just a screenshot from Scattered Spider's blog on the dark web. At least it was up. Maybe it's back up now. I'm not sure. The FBI took it down. Okay, but what was interesting about it was this paragraph. From a red teamer standpoint. Take a second to read that. The Okta agent servers, the bad guys were on the Okta agent servers sniffing passwords of people whose passwords couldn't be cracked from their domain controller hash dump. Let's put that in perspective. So before ransomware was even kicked off, Scattered Spider already had domain admin access to the network and was already in the process of cracking their passwords, and was already on the Okta servers listening for incoming credentials. Okay, and that's when Caesars was like, oh my gosh, we're being hacked, and that's when Scattered Spider was like, boom, ransomware and all your things. Okay, now you can learn some things from Scattered Spider, but Mandiant did an entire breakdown of Scattered Spider's, their TTPs and what they were using. And you can actually learn some things. So for example, come on over here. Yeah, there you go. So for example, stuff like this, AD Recon, AD Explorer, Ping Castle, internal reconnaissance, those are things that we use on red teams all the time. Okay, but there's something interesting that Scattered Spider does that I was paying attention to, and that's the social engineering aspect of it. Okay, we'll get to that in just a second. If you pay attention to these sorts of things, I mean, you can get, like, as a pen tester or a red teamer, you can learn, some cool things about tools that they run. So, for example, I had never heard of this tool, sysadmin, no idea. And what does this tool do, you might ask? Good question. This tool, it's basically used for Active Directory reconnaissance. It can do things like, AD queries and add users to groups and take action against Active Directory. You can run it through proxy chains. It's good stuff, right? I had no idea until I started reading these reports. But this is what I'm interested in. Tweet from VX Underground. The Scattered Spider ransomware group did more to compromise MGM resorts. What they did was they hopped on LinkedIn, they found an employee, and then they called the help desk. Now, as a red teamer, I appreciate this. I like this, okay? Because I know exactly what this flow looks like, having done it many times myself. What does it look like to find a target on LinkedIn? Okay, if you're a red teamer, you'll probably understand this flow. You go out to LinkedIn, you find your target organization. Now, here's how I choose targets on LinkedIn. Okay, I start scrolling through the people. I've sent out connection requests a long time ago, so I can see who's connected to who and have mapping throughout the organization. Okay, but I start scrolling through organizations looking at people's faces. And why am I going to do that? Because some people have yes faces and some people have no faces. Okay, and I can see some yes faces and I can see some no faces here. For example, you have a yes face. How is that? Your face just kind of naturally curls up, even at rest, you just look nice. Okay, just look like a nice guy. Some people, not quite as nice. Okay, but so what I'm doing is I'm looking for people that look like they're just naturally nice and helpful and outgoing, because that means they'll probably be naturally nice and helpful and outgoing to me when I call them. I don't have a yes face, I have a no face, and when you call someone that has a no face and you're like, hey, can you do something for me? They're like, who is this? What's your operating number? No, you're not going to get any help from them. Okay, so you want people with yes faces. For example, and you might ask yourself, is the help desk attack, is that even like, what does that look like? I'll tell you what it looks like, because these attacks still work. A couple years ago, a coworker of mine, Hans, and myself, we had to do some social engineering against a target that wanted us to social engineer their help desk. So Hans came up with a genius ruse. He put together an entire conference suite web page. It was like, myevilconferencesoftware.com, had a nice domain, had a full installation package for the C2. It was great. Okay, we call up the target help desk. A very nice person named Manny answers the phone. All right, Manny picks up the phone. Hello? And here's the ruse. Hans is like, he is going to pretend to be a salesman that needed to get this conference software installed. So Hans calls up the help desk. Manny answers the phone, and Hans is like, hey, this is Bob in sales. I'm getting ready to go into a meeting. I only have like 5 minutes, and they need me to install some custom software. This is before Zoom. They need me to install some custom software. Can you help me? I can't get to it. Can you get to it? And Manny's like, hold on a second. What's the URL? Hans gives him the URL. And Manny's like, all right, hold on. He pulls up a browser, clicks it. We see the hit come in. Okay? And Hans is like, okay, so you can get to it? Yeah, I can get to it. I can't install it. Can you install it? And Manny's like, hold on a second. Downloads it, installs it. We get C2. Hans is like, okay, well, the problem must be on my end. Thank you very much. Hangs up the phone. All right, so the next day, I had to do the same thing. And I'm like, I'm gonna do the exact, this works so well, I'm not gonna change a thing. So I call the help desk. Who do you think answers the phone? Manny. Hello? Hi, this is Jerry in sales. Hi, this is Manny. Hi, I'm trying to install some software. I only have like 5 minutes. Can you help me? And Manny's like, hold on a second, because he's help desk. It's helpful. He pulls up the browser. He's like, it's been blocked. And I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. He's like, hold on. Let me check my phone. Pulls his phone out of his pocket. Goes out to it. We see it come in. We're like, thank you. Hang up the phone. Does that stuff work? Yes, it works. What's the lesson? The best stage zero is a phone call. The best stage zero is a phone call. Okay, and what do I mean by stage zero? What I mean is the very first bit of code that you want to run in your target environment. Normally, that first bit of code is used to download other bits of code, which are used to download other stages and so on and so forth. But if you can get someone, a trusted user, to sit there and run your commands for you, they are effectively your stage zero. Okay, and it's so interesting because my first exposure to phone-based social engineering happened by accident. I didn't call them, they called me. I was introduced into an environment. I was doing an on-site test. I had 3 days to compromise an environment and to try and get into the credit card segmented network, okay? So my client brings me in. He sits me down at an empty cubicle. He goes over to his office. I have line of sight with my client. I sit down, I have my laptop, again, empty desk except for a phone. I plug in my laptop, and I'm like 3 days, stealth is not a factor, nmap all the things, go. I press go. And like 2 minutes later, the phone rings. I look over at my client. He's not calling me. And I'm like, why not? Pick up the phone. Hello? It's like, hey, this is Joe from network engineering. Are you running a port scan? Okay. And so you have to understand, in my mind, all of these thoughts happen at once. Number one, instant sweat. Number two, I think to myself, good on them for being able to map the fact that I was port scanning them to the desk, to the phone, and call me seriously 2 minutes later. And so I'm not gonna lie to this guy, because he knows. I'm like, yeah. And he's like, why are you doing that? And I'm like, it's just routine maintenance. And Joe said, this is a true story, I'm not making this up. Joe said, wait a second, this is all just maintenance? And I was like, yeah. And he said, does that mean I can ignore all these alerts? Yes. Joe's like, great, thanks. Hangs up the phone. I got into their cardholder data environment, exposed Dameware port in between the two systems. So yes, the best stage zero is a phone call. Second professional, Cloudflare. I read this article after my boss, Justin Elsie, had sent it to me. He reads it, he's like, you need to put this in your talk. I read it, I was like, this is going in the talk, it's gonna be great. So how does this start? This starts with the Okta breach from 2023. I'm not sure which one. Okta had kind of a bad year. And so a bunch of service accounts and passwords and stuff like that got leaked out. Bad guy gets a hold of them. He gets a hold of service accounts and authentication tokens from the authentication tokens from the Okta breach, and uses them to connect to Cloudflare's Jira and Confluence instances that were listening on the perimeter. Okay, I'm like, all right, okay, that's good. Connect and let me give you a little bit of disclaimer. When I say that's good, that's my red team self getting excited. I can hold two things in tension at the same time. I can appreciate a hack the way that I can appreciate like a heist in a heist movie, and at the same time, I can want to see bad guys get caught and go to jail. Okay, so just be careful. I'm not glorifying the bad guy at this point. All right, I am appreciating the attack. So he connects out. I'm like, yeah, all right, I could see myself doing that. And I think to myself, what would I do if I was in this situation, if I was the guy hands on the keyboard and I had access to Jira and Confluence? Well, I would read a ton of documentation, like a ton. I would just sit there and pull down documents over and over and over and read and see what is in this environment and learn as much as I can. Okay, this is like, some of my clients don't believe me when I tell them that 70% of a red team is spent doing internal situational awareness and internal reconnaissance. All right, it is the most boring job of the world until you find a password, and then it's awesome, okay? But typically it's boring because you're looking at things like Visio documents and accounting spreadsheets and blah, 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 trying to learn whatever you can learn about the organization. Okay, our guy spends one day reading documentation. One day. Now, okay, this is the part I'm reading through the article. This is the part where I'm getting a little frustrated. I'm like, one day, okay, spending one day reading documentation, I guess is better than spending 0 days reading documentations, but I'm like, all right, fine, at least you're doing that, okay? So after reading this documentation, our user, or our bad guy, creates a new Atlassian user account. Good move. Okay, creates a new account inside the system. I shouldn't say unprivileged. It is privileged, but it's not elevated privileges. Okay, so obviously the attacker has the ability to create accounts. Okay, so this would be like a persistent backdoor account. This gets created. And then something interesting happens. 4 days go by. Nothing. And by nothing, I mean the attacker is checking in, seeing if the access is still there, but not doing anything. Interesting, okay. What happens next? Well, our attacker decides to log back in and uses a Jira script runner to establish a Sliver C2 agent inside their system. Okay, so now the attacker has back C2 as well as access to Jira and Confluence. This is a good move. What do you think that attacker was doing during those 4 days? Well, I know what I would be doing during those 4 days. I don't have the first clue how a Jira script runner works, but I know that if I have access to Jira and I start researching and looking at documentation to see what can I do with this access, and I come across this mythical script runner, I'm going to research it, stand up a lab, I'm going to install some trial stuff, I'm going to stand up my C2, I'm going to do all the things that this bad guy has to do, and that takes time, energy, and effort. Okay, so now our attacker has C2 inside the environment, all right, with persistent backdoor undetected. Okay, this is important. What does he do then? It's a good move, okay? Our attacker uses the sliver access to start looking at Bitbucket repos internal. This was smart. And the reason why I like this from the standpoint of an operator is this is akin to reading documentation. That's exactly what this is. I'm pulling down repos looking for source code, DLLs, C#, plaintext passwords, SSH keys, API tokens, anything that I can use to further my knowledge about the target environment. Okay, now as an operator, I can feel the tension building just a little bit because at this point, remember, 120 repos have been viewed at this point. All right, now Cloudflare in their articles, like, this is a nation state. Maybe, okay, they didn't explicitly talk about attribution, and the fact that the attacker went after basically backup-related stuff, I kind of think this might be more related to ransomware, but maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, whatever. Okay, but at this point, from the standpoint of an operator, this is the part where I'm like, okay, I feel like I got to do something. Resident inside the network for a long time, undetected, looking at these various things, I can feel the tension rising, okay? Because it's normally at this point when I do something stupid and I get caught. And that is exactly what our bad guy does. He starts to get a little antsy behind the keys, and instead of taking the time to digest the information, all right, he decides he's going to take his user, promote him to admin. This was a mistake, okay? 2 minutes later, an automated alert is generated. 12 minutes later, a SOC investigation is kicked off. 35 minutes later, the service account that he was using was deactivated. 1 hour and 23 minutes later, persistence that he had set up was removed, and 5 hours and 31 minutes later, the IP was blocked. Red team, there are some lessons that we can learn from this. Number one, slowly drain your access. Slowly drain your access. What do I mean by that? What I'm talking about is figure out the systems that you have access to and work those systems. If you have documentation, work the documentation. If you have access to internal apps, work the applications, but work it down slowly, methodically, and don't get antsy. Believe me when I tell you, I have all these fingers pointing back at me because I do the same dumb things on red team operations that get me caught. In fact, I had an operation, it was a couple years ago. I was 10 weeks into a target environment, 10 weeks of invested time and energy and effort. I had achieved 2 out of 3 goals, and the client's like, okay, I want you to go for the 3rd goal, try and get this elevated access. I'm like, I'm running out of time, I gotta do something, and I made a mistake. The defense started pulling that thread, and I watched the entire operation crumble before my eyes. You probably want to know what the mistake was. I flipped the W digest key in memory before running, before trying to see if I could get a user to log off and back on so I could take their password. That's all it took. Flipped one key in the registry, whole operation comes down. Okay, slowly drain your access. Number 2, don't ignore applications. Applications, at least in my opinion, internal applications, are still a ripe, target-rich environment. All right, whether they've been created, like developed in-house, those are the best. All right, or even if it's a third-party application, doesn't matter. Still work the application access. All right, I was doing an operation once. I had internal access. I had administrator rights to SolarWinds. This is before the breach. Administrator rights to SolarWinds. I knew the defense was on me. Okay. Because my client had said something like, hey, Jason, the defense is on you. I'm like, okay, I got to do something. I go into SolarWinds. I roll the dice that they're not ingesting logs from SolarWinds into their SIM, and I create a backup administrator account for myself. All right, it was a risky move, didn't know it was going to happen, but I did it. Defense caught me, revoked my access, not from SolarWinds, kicked me out. I was able to get back in the network, but under a very low privilege context. All my other rights had been revoked. I had to start over with a different user. SolarWinds was still in place. I go out to SolarWinds. I still have admin rights. I turn in SolarWinds, you can, if you're familiar with SolarWinds at all, if you've ever done that kind of administration, you can configure SolarWinds to poll a machine. And I said, hey, SolarWinds, my attack machine is a Microsoft SQL database, go poll it. And what it did was it took its domain admin credentials, connected over to my attack machine with plain text, because that's what SQL authentication works. And so now I'm domain admin. Don't ignore applications, okay? I'm not sure if SolarWinds fixed that or not. Elevate only on pain of eviction, okay? If you need to elevate, expect that eviction is probably going to be coming at some point. And so use caution when doing that. Have backup access in place first. And that brings me to my last point there, intentionally establish dead ends. Okay, by intentionally established dead ends, what I mean is that if you have a target that's over here, it's okay to go over here, 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 and here. Exploit that access because you're slowly draining it. If you need to leave yourself a little bit of other access, go ahead and do so, because that might also throw off the defense while you're going over here. These things do happen because it all depends on what log sources the defense is ingesting, and they're probably not ingesting all of it. Okay, so we talked about the novice, we talked about the professional, and now we talk about the nation. The nation is an interesting one. First, we talk about UNC 4841. The UNC categorization is uncategorized in Mandiant's terminology, but they believe this to be the Chinese government. I'm inclined to agree with them. This was the target access, or the target list, the verticals that UNC 4841 went after. As you can see, mostly government, national governments, IT, local and state, telco, manufacturing. Those are the top 5. This is probably nation state. Okay, it sounds about right. Okay, but this attack started with CVE 2023-2868, which at the time was a 0-day. It had not been, there was no CV associated with it. It was being used, presumably by the Chinese government, to do these sorts of attacks. What does CVE 2868 do? It's impressive. You'll be impressed. Watch out for it. It's sophisticated. Actually, it really is. So the way it starts out is our attacker crafts evil.tar, okay, or creates an attachment, puts it into a message, sends the message to the email security gateway. The email security gateway opens up the evil.tar, runs the exploit code, sends back a reverse shell. That's how that attack works. Okay. Now that's cool. That is a good bug, okay, especially unauthenticated RCE. I like it. Here's where the cleverness comes in, where the sophistication comes in. UNC 4841 did this, created their payload, sent it off to Barracuda ESG, but deliberately triggered the spam filter so nobody would see the message. That was a good move. That was a good move. Okay? Nobody saw the message. After that, they have a different payload. This is Mandiant's payload naming convention. Payload called C-Spy. You send C-Spy off to the ESG across your C2 channel, and all that payload does, it has one job. It establishes a PCAP SMTP filter, and all it does all day long is just read email. Now why? Why? What's the point of doing that? Well, think about it from the perspective of the attacker. You have a 0-day. There are loads and loads of Barracuda ESG devices on the internet. You don't know how many. Maybe, I don't know if that's like, can you get that on Shodan? I don't know. Okay, let's assume that there are tens of thousands of these things. Okay, so you are spraying this around the internet, and you're getting back truckloads of shells. Well, you have to do post-processing on those shells to see if they're even targets in your top-tier target list. Did you compromise a government, or did you compromise, Bob's mechanic's car shop down the road? You don't know. You have to do post-processing to figure that stuff out. So I like that from the standpoint of methodology, because you're taking your time, you're reading, you're digesting information before you're making a decision. Okay, this was a cool attack, but I have one more. And the winner, at least in my opinion, I have never read a breach report like this, is UNC 3886, also believed to be the Chinese government. This attack was sophisticated, truly sophisticated. It starts out with an exposed FortiManager device listening on the internet, okay? Administrator portal is exposed. They get back a reverse shell. Article doesn't say how. I don't know. Maybe things are floating around the internet that could potentially show you how to get a reverse shell on, a FortiManager system. Maybe not. Who knows? But they have a reverse shell. Okay. Using that shell, they connect out to internal FortiGate devices using legitimate FortiManager scripts that push their backdoor to these firewalls. Okay. they use a 0-day in the process of doing this. The 0-day was a path traversal 0-day that allowed them to execute code in places they shouldn't have been able to execute code and read directories they shouldn't have been able to read. So they execute this code using a 0-day, get access to, now they have access to FortiManager as well as internal FortiGate firewalls. They must have picked up credentials somewhere along the way, not hard to imagine, because then they use SSH to connect to internal ESXi servers. Okay? From there, the path to exploitation involved creating malicious VMware installation bundles that then got pushed down to guest VMs, using another 0-day to achieve elevated access inside of those guest VMs. That's impressive to me. Why is that impressive? Because here are some things that I have not mentioned. Windows, certificate authorities, ESC1, responder, man-in-the-middle 6, crack map exec. None of those things got used. These guys just lived inside of network devices the whole time. That's impressive to me. Okay, so what are some lessons as we begin to bring this to a close? What are some lessons? Number one, red team lesson, monitor, decide, act. First, monitor. Pay attention to the data that is available to you. Do not land in an environment and then just knee-jerk react because you're terrified you're going to get caught. Don't do it. Take your hands off the keyboard. Go for a walk, get a coffee. First, turn on TCP dump so you can be monitoring. And then, okay, decide, make decisions on that. One of the guys on my team, all he did was he landed in an environment, I believe there was a physical pen test associated with it, so they drop off a stealthy implant device. It's calling back out through a MiFi. Stealthy implant device, we enable TCP dump, we're just monitoring packets on the wire. What comes along? An administrator PowerShell script with domain admin creds in it, and he's domain admin. Just by TCP dump. I couldn't believe it. I was like, Scott, what the? That's never happened to me. How does that happen? It happened to him. Good for Scott. Number two, aim for the effect, not the cause. This is very applicable to red teams because as a red team shop, I can't just craft a 0-day and throw it all over the internet. I can't do that, okay? Clients pay us to go after them specifically. You see, a nation state that has a 0-day, they are a skilled intruder, very skilled intruder. We, red teamers, get paid to be a determined skilled intruder. In other words, we're going after a very specific client. What if they don't have Barracuda? Well, I'm out of luck. Doesn't help me. Okay, but I can try and simulate the effect of such a compromise. All right, and that brings me to the last point there, which is implement scenario-based assume breach. I'm a big fan of this model, where, and I think when I say the words assume breach, I think they might mean different things, particularly in European countries. Forgive me if this is wrong. When I say assume breach, I think a lot of shops are like, you get shipped a laptop, and you work from the laptop. Okay. At least over at TrustedSec, when we say assume breach, that means that my client gives us someone in HR, and we work with that person stealthily to execute an implant or something like that, and then we work their access specifically from that shell. Okay, but even both of those models don't come anywhere near close to what I just described. So what does that mean? Where does that leave the red team? Well, it means that you have to be crafty and specific when it comes to scenarios to help improve your clients. Okay, don't just do one or the other. Start from a web server. Have the client give you access to a web server, and then see what you can do from there. I think TrustedSec is up to like 7 different assume breach categories. The whole point is to try and simulate some of these different activities that we see the malicious bad guys doing. Okay, so just to recap, if I had to wrap this all up, I would essentially say to the red team, slow yourself down. Slow yourself down. And I say this again, all the fingers pointing back at me, because it's very easy to just fire off all the lasers at once and get caught and do something stupid. Okay, slow down, read the environment, understand what you're up against. Okay, one more freebie, and that is eat the meat, spit out the bones. This is good life advice in general. And what does that mean? Well, anytime you read a book, anytime you see something, there's going to be bits and pieces of information that are worth keeping and bits and pieces of just like trashy hype that you should throw away, bones. Okay? This is true everywhere that we see, particularly in InfoSec. All right? Cobalt Strike's down, Mimikatz is blocked, and of course, the proverbial, in fact, there was a former speaker who dropped this one, attackers only have to be right once. I have corrected this on the phone so many times with clients. It drives me up the wall. Okay, no, attackers don't have to be right once. In fact, you have my permission to burn that whole thing with fire, because for the exact reason of the attacks that you saw, everything has to be pulled off in sequence. In fact, it might be more accurate to say attackers only have to be wrong once, okay, and then they're caught. Defenders also have to be right all the time. These are very orchestrated, well-tuned events that require precision. And if you get caught at any one point of those, you're evicted. It's gone. And so, by the way, we'll also throw that word on there as well, because that's just a bunch of trashy hype. So, all that to say, you all have been wonderful. Thank you very much. If you have questions, I'll be in the bar later. Take care.